Okay, so last time we sort of talked about the concept of demand, why demand slopes down, etc. And so today, what we're going to talk about is the idea behind the supply curve. But first, I want to show you guys a model that we can use to sort of organize our thinking about this. And that model is known as the production possibilities frontier. Which, because no one wants to say production possibilities frontier every time we refer to it, we just call it the PPF. Okay? And what the PPF is showing us is it shows us the maximum amount of stuff that we can produce. And so we can use this to describe nations production or individual production. I'm going to start off just by doing individual production because it's easier to think about, but in no way is it different from thinking about nations. Okay, and so let's think about Tom Hanks in the movie Castaway. Right? Which, by the way, is just a modern retelling of the story of Robinson Crusoe, to some extent, or Gilligan's Island. But we'll do Tom Hanks in Castaway, and this will contain spoilers for the movie, minor spoilers. But I don't feel too bad doing that. The movie's been out for probably 10 years at this point, and if you haven't seen it yet, that's your fault, not mine. So we're gonna go through and I'll spoil a little bit of it. Okay. So Tom Hanks, his airplane goes down and he finds himself stranded on an island all by himself. Okay, there's no one else there. So anything that Tom Hanks wants, Tom Hanks has to do himself. Okay, and let's pretend, which is not wholly inaccurate if you watch the movie, that Tom Hanks can either fish or harvest coconuts. Okay. And so any time that Tom Hanks spends fishing is time that Tom Hanks cannot spend harvesting coconuts, right? If he's catching fish from noon to 4, he cannot be harvesting coconuts from noon to 4, okay? And so if we were to just plot this, we could say, what is it that Tom Hanks can produce, right? He can produce, fish or coconuts. Okay? And if Tom Hanks were to spend all of his time fishing, let's say he would have this many fish and 0 coconuts. Okay? And so let's pretend that he does that. He spends his entire day fishing. Okay? And then he says, I think that I would like to have some coconuts. I'm getting a little bit tired of eating just fish, and some coconuts, might just be the variety that makes up the spice of my life. Okay? And so Tom Hanks says, okay, well, I'm going to spend a little bit less time fishing and a little more time harvesting coconuts. And so if you were Tom Hanks and you're sitting here, right, producing all fish and no coconuts, right, you probably want to give up your least productive fishing spot first because you want to sacrifice as few fish as you possibly can. And so let's say, you give up this many fish, so you go down this many fish, and now that you are free to go get some coconuts, you probably want to go to the best spot for coconuts that you know of. Okay? And so by sacrificing just this many fish, Tom Hanks might be able to get something like this many more coconuts. Okay, so we put that point right here. So he used to be here, and now because he has given up some fish, he can have more coconuts. And let's say that Tom Hanks is like, holy crap, these coconuts are amazing. I want more. Okay? But now he's in a pickle because he's already given up his worst fishing spot and he's already gone to the best coconut field. And so he's going to have to give up, let's say, his second best fishing hole, right? And notice that this time he gives up more fish, right, than he did before, because this distance right here is greater than this distance here. And since he's already gone to the best coconut field, he's going to have to go to the second best coconut field now, right? And let's say that that gives him this many more coconuts, right? And notice that this many is smaller than this many, okay? And so here we plot this point, okay? And let's say he continues, so he gives up his third worst fishing spot, okay? So notice that this distance here is bigger than this distance here, and he goes to his third best coconut field, right? This distance here is smaller than this distance here. Okay, and so we plot another point right there. And then let's say finally he says, you know what? I don't even want fish at all, right? I just want to spend all day harvesting coconuts, right? And so then he gets to here. So he would sacrifice this many fish to get this many coconuts. And if we connect these dots, what we would see is that the curve is bending down, right? And if we had more points, like fractional points, and let's say an infinite number of points, the curve would actually be much smoother than this disjointed thing. I would have to have more points in the middle, but it would be a bowing down, right? And what this is saying is that every time Tom Hanks wants to get more coconuts, he has to give up more and more fish than he did before, right? And what this is showing us, right, is that what he's doing is basically putting the worst fishing spot goes out, and the best coconuts, the best coconut field available comes in. So we sort of have the worst out, best in type of model, right? And the interesting thing to note is that each time T. Hanks wants more coconuts, he must give up more fish, right? So every time Tom Hanks wants to get more coconuts, he has to give up more fish than he did before. Or another way to think about it, each additional coconut costs more fish than the previous coconut, right? Each time he gets another coconut, he has to give up more fish than the last time, right? And what this is showing us is the idea of increasing marginal cost, right? The marginal cost of each coconut is more fish, is increasing in terms of fish. And so what we can do is we can take that and translate it into a price and a quantity and have an upward sloping line, which we call the supply curve, right? And so the supply curve is a marginal cost curve, right? And notice that it's increasing. So just like before, where the marginal cost of coconuts in terms of fish is increasing, that's all we've got right here is a straight increasing marginal cost curve, right? And the upward slope is showing us the marginal cost, right? And what this is saying right? Supply at its base level is basically a relationship between price and the amount we provide or sell, right? And what this is saying is that at a higher price, producers are willing to provide more. And so let's think about this in the context of our own lives. So if I offered you, let's say, $1 to come over and fold my laundry and put it away, my guess is that you would provide me with 0 hours of work, right? So at $1, you say, no, Dr. Hebert, I am not going to fold your laundry and put it away for you, right? But if I said, I'll pay you $1,000 to do it, right? I'll pay you $1,000 per hour to come in and fold my laundry and put it away, right? You might ask the question, well, how much laundry do you got, right? How long can I work for you, right? So at $1,000 per hour, you're willing to come over and fold my laundry and put it away for as long as I want you to, right? So that would be like a high number of hours that you would sell me, right? At a high price, but at a very low price, right? You don't bother coming over at all, right? And so that connection there is sort of showing us what's going on. Now, this gets at another important point. So just like when we talked about with demand and how there's a quantity demand versus a supply, versus a demand, there also is a supply versus a quantity supply. And so we can think of it in the same way. It's the exact same idea as demand, just with the word supply. Okay, so let's say that we can represent this supply curve here with the following tables. We have price and quantity. So at a price of 1, let's say you sell me 2. Right? At a price of 2, you sell me 4. At a price of 3, you'd be willing to sell me 6. At a price of 8, you'd be willing to provide or sell me, 4. You're willing to sell me 8. At a price of 5, you have 10, right? And so on and so forth. This whole table here is the same thing as the supply curve, right? This and this are the same thing, okay? But this quantity here is the quantity supplied at a given price. Okay, so if I give you a price, you can tell me the quantity supplied. And if the price increases, the quantity supplied increases, right? The supply doesn't increase. The quantity supplied does. Okay, so if I told you that oranges are now selling for $1,000 each, you would be correct in saying that the number of oranges that Walmart would have in their store would increase, right? That is true, okay? But that's an increase in the quantity supplied of oranges. It is not an increase in the supply of oranges, okay? And so that's a really big and a very important difference. If the change in the number of oranges that is available is due to a change in price, then it's a change in the quantity supplied. Okay? It is not a change in the supply. Now, let's do some examples of things that actually do shift supply. Okay? And so for this, for demand, we had 6 factors. For supply, we only really have 4. You could say a 5th, but it's really part of another one, but I'll split it out. Factors that shift supply. Okay, and there are 4. Some people say there's a 5th one, but the 5th one is really a part of one of the other 4. But I'm going to split it out for us just to be explicit about it. And so the first one is a change in the overall number, that's a number sign, not a hashtag, of sellers. Okay, and so if the number of sellers increases, price and quantity, if the number of sellers increases, then we shift the supply curve to the right. Okay? We do not shift it up. In this class, we're not going to do up and down stuff. We're only doing left and right. Okay? There are instances where these curves shift up and down, but I don't want to go into them in this class. They won't add anything for our purposes, and so we're going to save those for an intermediate level class. Okay? But the supply curve, if it increases, it's a shift to the right. Okay? So if the number of sellers increases, supply will shift to the right. And if the number of sellers decreases, supply will shift to the left. Okay? The second one is a change in the price of an alternative product. Okay? And so what this is saying is, let's pretend that we are a farmer and we have 100 acres of land. Okay? And let's say we can grow corn or soybeans. If you can't tell, economists find an example and we really just beat it to death. Supply one, and let's say that at current prices you are using 50 acres of corn, 50 acres of your land to produce corn, and 50 acres of your land to produce soybeans. Okay, and so let's pretend that the price of soybeans increases. Okay, so the price of soybeans increases, so we would move up along the supply curve for soybeans to, let's say, 80 acres. Okay, but the price of corn hasn't changed, right? There's nothing, I didn't say anything about the price of corn changing, but if I'm using 80 acres to produce soybeans, and I only have 100 acres, then I must be using less land to produce corn. And so the supply curve in this case will shift to the left, and we'll get to something like here, where I'm using 20 acres, but note that the price hasn't changed, right? And so here, because the price of soybeans increased, which is an alternative product for the farmers, right? The price of soybeans increased. We move along the supply curve of soybeans, but we shift the supply curve for corn to the left. Okay? So here, an increase in the quantity supplied of soybeans results in a decrease in the supply of corn. Okay? And we could do similar reasoning if the price of soybeans were to fall, right? We would move along the supply curve down to some point around here, and we would shift the supply curve of corn to the right. Okay, so a change in the price of an alternative product can also, or also does, shift the supply curve. Okay? But it's important to note that the price of corn in this example was not changing. Right? Only the price of soybeans was assumed to change. Okay? Corn, the price didn't change, but we still grew less of it, which means the supply curve had to shift left. The third one is a change in technology. Okay? And really what this is where that other factor comes into play. So really what it kind of is another way of saying, so I'll call this reason 3.5, right? Is a change in the cost of inputs. Okay, these are basically the same thing, right? A change in the cost of inputs and a change in technology, or at least in economics, basically the same type of idea, but I want to really emphasize this part's existence too because some people miss it. And so here, let's think about Henry Ford and the assembly line, right? So in Henry Ford's case, where he's making the assembly line, or he restructures his plant to more completely resemble an assembly line, what this says is that Henry Ford will now be more willing to supply cars to people at all prices. Okay? And so that would be an outward shift of the supply curve. Or we could think about the rise of the internet and what the internet did to the cost of reading material, right? The supply curve for reading, or things that you would read, dramatically increased because the cost of distributing them decreased. Right? We can also think about the printing press. What happened to the market for books when the printing press was invented, right? The supply of books shifted out to the right because it was now more cheap or easier to produce books, right? And so at all prices, people were now more willing to provide more than they were before. Okay? And number 4, the last factor, is a change in the expected price of a good, which really works a lot like reason number 2. So let's say that we are selling wine, and we can sell the wine today, or we can sell the wine next year. Right? And so we can do that. We can sell the wine either today or next year. And let's pretend that we know that the price of wine next year is going to go up. Right? So if it goes up, we move along the supply curve for wine for next year. Right? So we expect the price of wine to rise next year. And so what we want to do is we want to sell the wine then and not so much today. And so the supply of wine today will decrease, right? Even though here it's not because the price of wine today changed, it's only because the price of wine tomorrow changed, okay? And so it's you have to be very careful about this because I'm saying that the expected price changed, not the price. Okay, if the price of the good changes, then the quantity supplied will change. But if the expected price changes, then the supply will actually change. And so we can think of it just like in terms of our table from before. So actually, I'll just bring that back. Right, so here, right, this could be, you could think of this as the quantity supplied for supply curve 1. And if I were to increase the supply, just to say shift it to the right, we would find that the quantity supplied for supply 2, or the second supply curve, would be higher at all prices. Let's say this is 4, and this could be 6, 8, 10, 12, etc. So when the supply increases, right? When the supply curve increases, what we're saying is that all the numbers in this column are greater than their corresponding number in this column, right? So we could say all the quantities supplied have increased. So at a price of 1, we used to provide 2. But when the supply curve increased, now we're willing to provide 4. At a price of 2, we used to provide 4. Now we're willing to provide 6. And 3, 6, now 8, 4, used to be 8, now it's 10, 5, used to be 10, now it's 12, and so on and so forth, right? So when supply increases, what it's saying is that this number is bigger than this number is bigger than this number, and so on and so forth, right? If supply were to decrease instead, so let's say this is the supply curve 3, and so we move that way. We could say here, quantity supplied for supply curve number 3, maybe it's 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on. And so here, if the supply curve decreased from Q or from S1 to S3, right, we're saying 0 is less than 2, and 2 is less than 4, and 4 is less than 6, and 6 is less than 8, and 8 is less than 10, and so on and so forth, right? So when we say the supply changed, we're saying all of these numbers here changed, right? While these stay the same. These change, these stay the same. If this is changing, then the number we pull out of this column will change, right? So if I go from a price of 1 to 3, I will provide more, right? I'm willing to sell you more. I'm willing to sell you 2 or 6 or 4 or 8 or 0 versus 4, right? I'm willing to do more the more you pay me. But that is not an increase in supply. It's an increase in the quantity supplied. Okay? Another way that we can think about this, we can think about the supply curve, is we can think about it as a reflection of the producer's opportunity cost. Okay? As someone asks you to work more and more hours, they're also asking you to give up more and more valuable alternatives during your day. Okay? And so let's sort of make a hypothetical day for you if you were not going to be working. So let's pretend this is, your day off. Okay? So when you do this, you will, let's say, so here's a hypothetical day. All right, here's your schedule. So we'll do like a sort of a Benjamin Franklin type thing. So let's say you sleep and you spend 8 hours doing that, because that is the daily recommended amount, right? You want to go to the gym. You're going to do that for 2 hours. You want to watch TV. You're really just looking to veg. So you do that for 4 hours. And of course, you have to play video games. What sort of a day would it be without video games? You want to do that for 2 hours. Okay. Eating, right? You want to eat 3 meals, and you're going to take your time. It's your day off, so you'll eat for 3 of your hours. And of course, you want to see friends for 3 hours. And maybe you want to read for the remaining 2 hours of your day. Okay? And let's rank these things in order of importance. Right? So your most important thing is to sleep. Your second most important thing is to eat. Your third priority is perhaps your friends. Your fourth priority is watching TV. Your fifth priority is video games. Your sixth priority is to read. And your seventh priority is to go to the gym, right? So the most valuable thing to you is sleep, and the least valuable thing to you is going to the gym, okay? Now, let's pretend that I asked you to give up 2 hours of your day, right? Well, which 2 hours would you give up from this list? If this is your ranking, if this is how you order your activities, you will give up going to the gym for those 2 hours, because the gym is the least valuable thing, or the least important thing to your day. So if I ask you to give up 2 hours of your life, you will sacrifice the gym. Okay? And if I asked you to work a third hour, right? If I asked you to give up a third hour of your day, well, you've already given up the gym, and now you have to give up half of your reading time, right? And I'd have to pay you more because now I'm asking you to give up some time that you wanted to dedicate to reading, and reading is more important to you. And so to get you to give up your time at the gym, your first 2 hours of your life, I might have only had to pay you a little bit, right? But if I want to get that third hour out of you, well, now I have to pay you more, right? And if I want to get you to work for me for 8 hours, right? All of a sudden, you're going to give up the gym, which is 2 hours. You're going to give up reading, which is another 2 hours, so we're at 4, right? 5 hours, so now you want to give up video games as well, which is 6 hours. Now we're at 6. And I'm going to have to get you to give up half of your television time. Well, that's going to be worth a lot to you, right? And so I'm going to have to pay you to sacrifice higher ranking things. And the more I ask you to give up, the more I'm going to have to pay you per hour to get you to do that, right? Okay, and so for these reasons, we can think about why the supply curve must slope up, right? Increasing marginal cost, increasing opportunity cost for the producer. These are all different ways that we can think about the same thing. Okay, so in the next lessons, we're going to be putting both the demand curve and the supply curve together and creating sort of the Marshallian scissors as they're known. So stay tuned so we can do some equilibrium analyses with two curves going on the same graph.